Welcome, beloved soul. This is the third reflection in our Pillars of Character series. In the first, we explored integrity, the courage to face what is true. In the second, we reflected on self-discipline, the quiet ordering of the inner life. Today, we turn to responsibility, not as blame, not as burden, but as gentle ownership, the willingness to tend what has been entrusted to us and to release what has not. As you listen, allow yourself to rest into the question this story carries. What is yours to carry and what is not?
The question without answer. The morning came gray and heavy over the valley, and the man stood at the edge of his field where the wheat had yellowed too early. His neighbor's portion, the land that bordered his own, lay fallow now, untended since drought and misfortune had driven the family southward toward Egypt. A traveler passing through the previous evening had mentioned the neighbor's name. Had he heard anything of him? Did he know how the children fared? The man had felt something tighten in his chest. Not grief, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something he did not wish to name. "Am I my brother's keeper?" he had replied, and the words had come too quickly, too smoothly, as if they had been waiting in his mouth for years. The traveler had said nothing. He had only looked at the man with something like sorrow and moved on. Now, standing where his land met the abandoned field, the man turned the question over in his mind like a stone worn smooth by a river. It was an old question, ancient as blood on soil, and he knew its origin. He knew whose mouth had first shaped those syllables in the presence of the divine. Cain's question, the first deflection, the original turning away. He had not lifted his hand in violence, and yet the question had risen to his lips unbidden, a shield against something he did not want to see. Genesis 4 verse 9. The field and the separate furrow. The man returned to his work, but the rhythm of his hands could not quiet his thoughts. He thought of the seasons before, how he had blamed the rains when his harvest fell short, blamed the merchants when his wool brought poor prices, blamed those within his household when the morning bread was late. Always there was something outside himself to name. Always the fault lay elsewhere, like a shadow cast by someone else's form. And when others struggled, he had learned a different kind of deflection, not blame outward, but absorption inward. He would take their burdens as his own, carry what was not his to carry, and then grow bitter when the weight became too great. He called it compassion. It felt like drowning. Where was the line? He remembered words spoken by a teacher who had passed through the village in his youth, a man who carried scrolls and wisdom in equal measure. Let each one examine his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. For each will carry his own load. The man had not understood it then. It had sounded like permission to abandon, like a door left open for the selfish to walk through. But standing now in the quiet of his own field, dirt beneath his fingernails and sweat cooling on his brow, he began to see it differently. There was indeed a load that was his. Decisions he had made, seeds he had planted or failed to plant, words he had spoken that could not be unspoken. This was not burden as punishment. This was simply consequence, the natural fruit of his own hands, his own heart, his own agency. And there were burdens that belonged to others, their choices, their paths, their own reckoning with the divine. He could walk beside them. He could offer water for the journey. But he could not carry what was theirs to carry, any more than he could breathe with another man's lungs. The confusion had always been here. Mistaken compassion for obligation, mistaking presence for absorption. He could be present without being consumed. He could care without owning what was not his. The quiet accounting. That evening, as the sun bled orange and amber across the hills, a companion who walked beside him in those years found the man sitting outside his dwelling, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "You have been quiet today," the companion observed. "I have been counting," the man replied. "Counting what?" "What I have been given." He did not mean silver or livestock, though he had both. He meant something deeper. The capacity to work, the land that received his labor, the seasons that returned with faithful regularity despite his faithlessness to them. He meant the years he had been granted to learn, the teachers who had spoken truth into his stubbornness, the mornings he had woken to another chance. He thought of another teaching, one that had always frightened him. From everyone who has been given much, much will be required. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, even more will be asked. He had always heard this as threat, like a tally kept by an accounting god, waiting to find him wanting. But now, in the amber light, he heard something else. Not because God was cruel, but because awareness could not be unfelt. What he knew, he could not unknow. What he could do, he could not pretend was beyond him. The gifts he had received were not weights to resent, but truths that illuminated what was now his to own. His neighbor's fallow field was not his burden to carry, but his own field the soil he had neglected, the seeds he had failed to plant in their season, the excuses he had made to himself for years. This was his, and he could not wait for applause. There would be no audience for the quiet work of becoming accountable. No one would celebrate the morning he chose to rise early and tend what had been neglected. No one would sing songs of the man who simply did what was his to do. But the wheat would grow, or it would not. And either way, it would be his. Owned, accountable, known. Fields left untended do not remain empty. They invite weeds, and weeds do not ask permission before they spread. The true weight. In the days that followed, the man changed not dramatically, not in ways that others would notice. He simply began to carry what was his. When blame rose to his lips, he paused. He asked himself, "What is mine in this?" When resentment whispered that he was doing too much for others, he paused again. He asked, "Am I carrying their load or walking beside them as they carry their own?" When comparison crept in, my neighbor has more land, better fortune, easier seasons, he returned to the words of the teacher. Let each one examine his own work, his own work, his own field, his own load. Galatians 6 verses 4 to 5. Not his brother's keeper in the way Cain meant it. Cain's remark was a deflection, a sneer, a refusal of basic human kinship. But not his brother's carrier, either a savior complex dressed in exhaustion, a martyr's costume worn to the point of bitterness, something in between, something truer. A man who knew what was his to carry and carried it. A man who walked beside others without collapsing into them. A man who understood that what he had been given asked something of him, not as punishment, but as purpose. The story could have ended there. A man who learned what was his to carry and what was not. But responsibility does not live only within us. It meets us again when we walk beside others. The sun had not yet broken the ridge when the man heard the sound. It was a low, rhythmic scraping stone against stone coming from the eastern terraces where his neighbor Levi kept his vineyard. The sound was wrong. Not the purposeful strike of a worker dressing a wall before the heat, but the halting rasp of exhaustion, of a body working beyond its measure. The man set down his water jar. He had risen early to tend his own rows before the sun grew cruel, but something in that scraping pulled at him the way a child's cry pulls a mother from sleep. He climbed the narrow path between their lands, his sandals finding the familiar grooves worn into the hillside by generations of feet. When he crested the rise, he found what he had feared. Levi knelt in the rubble of a collapsed terrace wall. During the night, the rains had come suddenly, one of those violent storms that shook the hills and vanished by dawn, leaving only destruction in its wake. Half the wall had given way, spilling its stones across the vineyard like broken teeth. And there among them knelt a man of 60 years, his hands bloodied, his breath ragged, Trying to lift a stone meant for two backs with only one. "Brother," the man called. Levi looked up. His face held no shame, only weariness, and beneath that, something harder, the iron of a man who had learned not to ask. "The wall fell," Levi said, as if it required explanation. "The rains. I heard them." The man descended into the rubble. Without a word, he positioned himself on the other side of the stone Levi had been struggling with. Their eyes met a silent question, a silent answer, and together they lifted. The stone rose. They carried it to the gap in the wall and set it in place. They worked that way through the morning, saying little, understanding much. When the sun reached its height and the air grew thick with heat, the man brought water from his own jar. When Levi's hands began to shake with exhaustion, the man took the heavier side of each stone. When the wall was half rebuilt and could wait for another day, the man helped Levi to his feet and walked into the shade of an ancient fig tree where they rested together in silence. This was the way of the hills. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. The man had learned this not from scrolls, but from the soil itself, from the shared weight of harvest and the shared grief of drought, from hands extended without question and received without shame. He did not think of it as charity. He thought of it as what neighbors did when the rain came hard and the walls fell down. But rain comes more than once. 3 days later, the man heard the same scraping sound at dawn. He found Levi again in the eastern terraces, this time clearing stones from another section of wall that had weakened but not yet fallen. The man joined him without being asked. A week after that, Levi's roof began to leak. The man climbed up with him and helped patch the gaps with mud and straw. A month after that, Levi's well rope frayed and snapped. The man walked to the village and returned with a new rope coiled over his shoulder. Each time he helped, each time he carried, and each time, when he returned to his own land afterward, he found his own rows a little more neglected, his own walls a little more worn, his own water jar a little more empty. He did not resent it, not at first. What was one morning's labor against the bond of neighbors? What was one sacrifice against the weight of another man's suffering? He had been blessed with strength enough to share. The scrolls said that to whom much is given, much will be required. He had been given much. But as the months passed, something began to shift. He noticed that Levi no longer rose at dawn. He noticed that when they worked together, Levi's hands moved slower each time, not from age or injury, but from something else, a kind of waiting, a leaning. He noticed that Levi had begun to call for him before problems arose, asking for help with tasks that one man could manage alone. And he noticed, this was the hardest to see, that his own vineyard had grown wild in places. His own terrace walls had begun to sag. His own family received less of him each day because he was always walking the path to the eastern hillside, always answering the unspoken call. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, the man sat alone beneath his fig tree and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. It was not anger. It was closer to grief. If this resonates with something you've carried, something you've felt but couldn't name, share it with someone who might need to hear it. The woman who sold oil in the village had known the man since childhood. She was old now, her back bent from years of carrying jars, but her eyes remained sharp, the eyes of someone who had seen too much to speak carelessly. "You look tired," she said when he came to trade olives for oil, not the tired of hard labor, the tired of a man who has been lifting stones that are not his own. He did not answer. She did not need him to. "There are two kinds of weight," she said, measuring oil into his jar with practiced hands. "There is the weight that falls, suddenly the boulder that crushes, the storm that destroys, the grief that breaks a man in half. This weight no one can carry alone. To ask a neighbor to bear it alone is to ask him to die." She set down the measure and looked at him. But there is another weight, the daily weight. The stones a man must carry to build his own house, roof his own shelter, walk his own road. This weight is not meant to be shared. It is meant to be borne. And when you carry it for another, you do not help him. You hollow him. You take from him the very labor that would make him strong. The man stared at her. How do I know which is which? The old woman smiled, not with condescension, but with the tenderness of someone who had asked the same question once, long ago, and had paid dearly for the answer. You don't always know, she said. That's why you must test your own work, not his, yours. She handed him the jar of oil. Look at your own vineyard, son. Look at your own walls. Look at what you have built and what you have left to crumble. Then ask yourself, whose load have you been carrying? And what has it cost you? That night, the man could not sleep. He walked his own terraces in the moonlight, and for the first time in months, he truly saw them. The weeds that had grown between the vines, the stones that had shifted in the walls he had neglected, the cistern that needed cleaning, the path that needed clearing. He had been so busy building another man's house that his own had begun to sag. And the worst of it, the thing that twisted in his chest like a thorn, was this. He had not helped Levi grow stronger. He had helped him grow smaller. Each stone lifted for him was a stone Levi would never learn to lift himself. Each morning answered was a morning Levi would never learn to face alone. The man had confused compassion with rescue. He had confused love with control. He had confused bearing another's burden with becoming another's burden bearer. And in doing so, he had robbed his neighbor of the very dignity he thought he was preserving. The next morning, when the scraping sound came from the eastern terraces, the man did not rise. He sat beneath his fig tree and listened. His hands ached to help. His feet yearned to walk the familiar path. Everything in him screamed that he was being cruel, that he was abandoning a brother, that this was not love but selfishness wearing a mask. But he stayed. An hour passed. Then two. When he finally walked to the ridge and looked down, he saw Levi sitting in the rubble, not working, but simply sitting, his face turned toward the path the man always came by. Waiting, the man descended slowly. He sat beside his neighbor in the dust and said nothing for a long time. Finally, Levi spoke. You didn't come. No. I thought perhaps you were ill. I am not ill. Silence stretched between them, uncomfortable and necessary, the kind of silence that precedes either rupture or renewal. I have been taking from you, Levi said at last. His voice was quiet, ashamed. Haven't I? The man considered his words carefully. You have been receiving what I have been giving. The fault is not yours alone. I didn't mean to. The man picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands. When your wall fell, he said, I came because you needed me. That was right. A man cannot lift a boulder alone, and no one should have to try. But somewhere along the way, I stopped helping you lift boulders. I started lifting pebbles for you. Pebbles you could have carried yourself. He set the stone down, and in doing so, I convinced you that you could not carry them. I took your strength by offering mine too freely. That was not kindness. That was theft. Levi's eyes glistened. I did not see it. Neither did I, not until it cost us both. They did not rebuild the wall that day. Instead, they sat together beneath the fig tree and spoke as they had not spoken in all their months of labor. They spoke of the burden that had fallen suddenly, the wall, the storm, the crisis that no man should face alone. And they spoke of the load that had followed, the daily weight, the ordinary demands, the work that every man must carry for himself, if he is to remain a man at all. How will I know, Levi asked, when to ask for help and when to stand alone? The man considered this. Perhaps you begin by standing alone first. Carry what you can. Build what you are able. Let each one test his own work. not to prove anything to others, but to prove something to yourself, to know what you are capable of, to find your reason for gratitude in what you yourself have carried. He paused, and when the boulder comes when the weight is too great for one back to bear, then call out, not as a man who cannot lift anything, but as a man who has lifted everything he can and still needs a brother's shoulder. Levi nodded slowly. And you? Will you still come? The man placed his hand on his neighbor's shoulder, not lifting, not carrying, but simply present. Beside him, near him, not collapsed into him. I will come when the boulder falls, he said. For the pebbles, brother, you are strong enough. In the weeks that followed, the man tended his own vineyard. He repaired his own walls. He cleaned his own cistern and cleared his own path. And when he worked, he found that the labor did not feel like burden. It felt like restoration. Each stone placed in his own wall was a declaration. I am responsible for this. This is mine to build. This weight is not punishment. It is purpose. From time to time, he would look across the ridge and see Levi working in his own terraces, slower than before, less certain, but working. And in that working, in the strain of muscle and the sweat of brow and the small victories of a man carrying what was his to carry, Levi grew. Not larger, just stronger. And when, months later, another storm came and brought down a wall too great for one man to lift, Levi called out, and the man came. And together they bore the burden as brothers, not because one was helpless and the other was savior, but because both had learned which stones required two hands and which required only their own. This was the wisdom of the hills. This was the law written not on scrolls, but in the muscle and sinew of lived experience. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. But let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. For each will have to bear his own load. Galatians 6 verses 2-5. Years later, when the man had grown old and his own hands had begun to shake, a young neighbor came to him with a question. How do I know when to help and when to stand back? How do I know which weight to share and which to leave for another to carry? The man smiled not with certainty, but with the hard-won peace of someone who had wrestled with the question and found, if not an answer, then a way of living inside the tension. You will not always know, he said. That is the burden of discernment, and it never grows lighter. He gestured to the terraces, to the walls he had built over a lifetime, to the vineyard that had fed his family and would feed another's when he was gone. But start here. Tend your own land first, not from selfishness, but from stewardship. You cannot lift another man's boulder if your own arms have grown weak from neglect. You cannot share your grain if your own fields lie fallow. He paused, and his eyes grew distant, remembering. And when you see another struggling, truly struggling, not simply avoiding what is hard, go to them. Sit beside them. Ask what they need. Sometimes they will need your hands. Sometimes they will need only your presence. And sometimes this is the hardest lesson. They will need you to believe in their strength more than they believe in it themselves. The young neighbor frowned. That sounds like doing nothing. The old man shook his head. No, son. That is the most difficult work of all. To stand beside someone in their suffering without stealing their struggle. To be present without becoming their solution. To love without controlling. He met the young man's eyes. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. But what is demanded is not always labor. Sometimes it is restraint. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for another is to let them discover what they are capable of carrying. The sun set behind the western hills, casting long shadows across the terraces. The old man and the young neighbor sat together beneath the ancient fig tree, not working, not solving, not carrying anything at all. Simply present, simply beside, and in that presence, a kind of peace settled over them both, the peace of men who had learned that love is not measured by how much we carry, but by how well we discern what to lift and what to leave, when to offer our backs and when to offer our belief, when to rush forward and when to simply remain. This is the narrow path between isolation and rescue. This is the gate that leads to freedom. This is the way. If this story spoke to you, if it named something you felt but couldn't articulate, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Like, comment, and subscribe to walk alongside more stories like this. And if someone in your life is wrestling with where their responsibility ends and begins, share this with them. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is words for what has too long gone unspoken. Let us close with prayer. Holy God, grant us the wisdom to know what is ours to carry, the courage to tend it faithfully, and the grace to release what is not. Let us say, Amen.
Thank you for sharing this sacred story with me. If it touched your heart, you may also find peace and clarity in our Meditative Reflections playlist, a series of guided meditations inspired by these very Bible stories. Each one is crafted to help you slow down, breathe deeply, and connect more fully with God's presence in your life. Remember to subscribe, leave a comment if something resonated with you, and share this with someone who may need a little hope today. Until next time, transforming minds and empowering souls, and as always, peace, love, light, and unity.